Welcome back, everyone. This is Routes y Raíces, and today's episode is going to focus specifically on good moral character. Why are we focusing on this? Well, simple, because there's been some changes in policy when it comes to the good moral character aspect, also known as GMC. As of August of 2025, these changes took effect, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it because it is impacting people in their cases today in 2026.
Yes, it is. And another thing that I want to just quick point out is good moral character is a criteria for numerous, I think almost all forms of immigration benefits. They're always checking to see if the person who has applied has good moral character. But for today's episode, we're going to focus on good moral character in the context of applying for citizenship, because the policy memo that we're going to be discussing is specific to the citizenship context, or naturalization as it's called.
Correct. And so what the heck is good moral character? Well, just like any other term in immigration law, it's not really defined. It encompasses many things.
Yeah.
You can't, as attorneys.
Who even says that? Good moral character? Like, who talks like that?
I don't know. Are you a person of good moral character? Go ask your neighbor that and see what they say. See how they look at you. So, as any attorney should do, is usually when there's a term in a specific area of law, you go and you look at the text of the statute, and the statute usually defines the term. And in this case, good moral character is not defined, but it has been applied in terms of...
It's a lot of things, like you said. It's a balancing.
It's a balancing factor, yes.
Basically. Like, good moral character means that they're going to see if there are any dings on your history, criminal history in particular, or just, any shady things that may exist in your past in terms of like immigration.
So in terms of, we're focusing specifically on good moral character as far as naturalization, right? So for the naturalization process, there are requirements a person must meet to be able to apply for naturalization, okay? And ultimately become, obviously, a U.S. citizen. Some of those requirements are age, status, residence, physical presence, location, language and civics, attachment to the Constitution, and good moral character. We are not going to talk about any of the other ones. We're just going to focus on good moral character.
And again, because of this policy memo that really isolates good moral character as this issue that they're making more of a big deal about.
So when did this change happen? Well, it happened last August 15th of 2025. So USCIS, which is the agency that a person goes through to start and ultimately go through the process, that's the agency that handles it. That agency, USCIS, issued a policy change, right? They issued a memo indicating that officers who work for USCIS will assess an applicant's good moral character going forward. They issued a standard that will be used to determine whether that person, that applicant, actually met the good moral character standard, the GMC standard. In their policy, if you go read the policy, we'll add the link to our YouTube video of the actual policy and the text of the policy. They are approaching the good moral character in their terms, quote unquote, the holistic assessment, which adds a level of subjective adjudication. Why is it subjective adjudication? Because in immigration law, especially with USCIS, I mean, really, realistically anywhere, whether it's DHS counsel or immigration judges or officials at USCIS, everything happens to be very subjective. If your application falls on a specific officer, that officer could view it differently than their colleague, another officer, right? It's very subjective.
Absolutely.
So before this policy change, the requirement for naturalization is that during a specific period, which I would say was generally 5 years.
Yeah, generally 5 years before applying for citizenship is the statutorily required timeline. Now, the reason that it's 5 years is because in order to be eligible for citizenship, you have to show that you've been a lawful permanent resident for at least 5 years. So this assumes that it's somebody that is going to apply for citizenship right away. And if something happens in that time, in that 5 years, then they would have to wait, 5 years from whenever that issue is cleared. But yeah, you need 5 years of
At minimum
of clear history.
So certain acts, right, could bar a person from meeting that good moral character standard. So there are certain things that could prevent an applicant from establishing that good moral character standard per statute. So whether an applicant satisfied good moral character, I mean, realistically, back then and today, it's always been discretionary.
Good moral character? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to a large extent. Like, there are some things, like if it's a crime involving moral turpitude, like, I think that's probably pretty well set that would be definitely a disqualifier. But in terms of other things, it's very flimsy. Mm-hmm. Like, it's really subjective, in my opinion, in terms of what's going to be an issue in terms of good moral character or not.
Now USCIS officers must account for applicants' positive attributes. But it sounds like they considered those before, Kimmy?
They did, but they weren't like strictly required. One of the positive attributes that they might take into account is how long you've been a permanent resident, whether you have family members here who are U.S. citizens, if you're a care provider, like if you have young children, things like that, like obviously file taxes and things like that. Or if maybe you've volunteered consistently somewhere, they would take that into consideration if you submit proof of that. But with volunteer stuff and family members and all of these other things, they didn't necessarily require proof of it. Like if it was there, fine, but if it wasn't strictly required, where it seems like now they are suggesting that they want to see evidence of those sorts of things.
The new policy requires positive attributes and, like Kimmy was saying, like proof of these attributes, right? Mm-hmm. These positive before it wasn't like that. And I just want to clarify that they changed this even though the INA, which is Immigration Nationality Act, doesn't require that. That's actually not even like listed on there.
And I think with a lot of this stuff, that's kind of the issue, is that the law doesn't specify what it is. So USCIS is just making these up as they go via policy memos.
Right.
And trying to fill in some of those gaps.
Right. So if you look at, I know we said it in our video that we're not going to cite statutes unless it's appropriate. So I think this is appropriate. So the INA 101F, right, specifically when it deals with like the GMC aspect, the good moral character aspect. Probably the only time I'm going to mention a statute, but I think it's proper here because of the point we're trying to get across, and that is policy issues being implemented that are contrary to the statute, the law, right? And so if you look at that specific statute, it states that acts or circumstances will weigh against an applicant's GMC requirement, the good moral character requirement. Conversely, the memo created a bright line rule standard which contradicts the law specifically, okay? In other words, the law doesn't necessarily account for quote unquote positive attributes. The policy does, contrary to what the law says. And the law is not created through agencies. The law is created through Congress. And these agencies are essentially not following what the law says.
Right.
Right?
I mean, their argument is that they haven't made this argument, but I'm assuming that their position is like, we're filling in the gap because the law doesn't specify, so we can kind of make it up how we see fit, which is what's happening here. But even with the changes to the requirements for good moral character, honestly, a lot of this stuff is stuff that they were doing already.
Right.
So,
right.
What's some of the new stuff?
The new policy places an emphasis on the need to demonstrate positive attributes, as we were just saying, are contributions in all naturalization cases, not some, all cases. Examples that they list were like family caregiving responsibilities and ties to the United States, education, stable and lawful employment history, length of lawful residence, compliance with tax obligations. I'm going to talk a little more about the compliance with tax obligations because that's where people are being essentially denied more than approved because of that, the tax part. But
well, yeah. Yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah,
That's
we'll
fine.
get into that a little more. But the examples I just read they've considered that before, like Kimmy was saying, but now they're like really harping on it. So I guess one of the biggest things that I can think of as to how this negatively impacts somebody who's applying for citizenship, education. Right? What if somebody came here and, they went through the whole process, obviously, and now they're going through naturalization, but they never received like higher education.
And not everybody can afford it.
Right.
Not everybody can afford it. Not everybody necessarily wants it. There are language barriers sometimes early on, especially like when you first move to a new country, you may or may not speak the language in the first year or two. So there's all sorts of hurdles to being able to obtain higher education. But even if it's not those things, like it's expensive.
Right.
It's not cheap to go to college.
Right.
A bunch of us have student loans.
Right.
So,
right.
Is that great that we've put ourselves into debt to pursue higher
Right.
education? Because then the minute you have a debt, now that's a negative factor.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole requirement just seems weird to me, but I don't know. It's an indication of like furthering classism.
Right. And even like when we think about education, we think about like younger adults, right?
Right.
But that could apply, as it said here, contributions in all naturalization cases. That could apply to somebody who's like elderly who came here when they were adults. Forget about education or anything. We're just coming here to, raise our children and
work.
retire and work and retire.
Right.
Like their goal was never to go to a university and incur all this debt. Like their goal was to provide for their family. So because they don't have this post-professional degree or any type of degree for that matter, does that mean they don't qualify to become U.S. citizens? Who knows?
Yeah, and they haven't really specified like what that means in practice. I haven't seen them apply that in an aggressive way yet, but it's just something that like we don't know enough about right now in terms of like how are they actually going to be applying it? What is it specifically that they're going to want to see in terms of education? Are we talking about like, oh, did this person ever get a GED or high school diploma? Do they want something higher? Are they being strict about that application? Is it outweighed by other factors? Like we really just don't know enough about it right now.
Right. And then if you look at the next factor that they consider when they look at the overall good moral character standard, stable and lawful employment history. So what does that even mean? Stable and lawful. In particular, what does stable mean? We know that the minimum requirement for somebody to apply for naturalization is 5 years minimum, right? Mm-hmm. So does that mean that within the 5 years you had to have one job for 5 years? Or more than 1 year, or at least bare minimum 1 year? Well,
it just doesn't even fucking make sense, especially like the lawful part of it. We're talking about this is a lawful permanent resident.
Right, exactly.
Okay? That's right. Applying. So it's somebody who is here lawfully and can lawfully work, and you need at least 5 years of lawful permanent resident status in order to apply for citizenship. So how are they going to have worked unlawfully in that time? Like it just doesn't even fucking make sense.
Right.
But I'm not even worried about that. I mean, again, I feel like it's just one of those things where they're trying to say that immigrants are, I don't know, not working somehow or living off of the system, or I don't even know what the fuck they're trying to say with this. Because what they're also saying is that immigrants are stealing jobs. So which one is it?
Right.
So, I mean, in my experience, most of the time, like people that I deal with are steadily employed. I have not really seen people who are unemployed for long stretches of time, unless it's somebody who, it was maybe like a stay-at-home mom where the husband is working and taking care of all the finances and she's at home, but they're doing fine and are able to afford to do that. But should that be held against her? Like, I don't know what we're trying to say with this.
So yeah, I mean, basically what we're getting at is these examples that are set forth in the USCIS policy, they're very subjective, and which ones will apply to you and which ones will help you or which one will ultimately lead to a denial, it's hard to say because they don't really give guidance to that effect, right? They don't give guidance as to, hey, this may help you or this may not help you. We don't know. We don't know what this holistic positive attributes means. And again, these factors are not language that are in the statute. Going back to that statute I mentioned, if the law says these are the attributes that you have to look at, okay, boom, the law says that, I can point it to the law, I can point it to the statute, but that's not what it says. USCIS essentially added those factors in the policy change.
I do want to talk about this compliance with tax obligations.
Yeah, so
Let's talk
that's
about
the
that.
one we really wanted to harp on. Why? Because that one has definitely changed and has definitely led to denials of people.
Honestly, like the only thing that's really changed that I can perceive, or the main difference, is whether or not somebody is on
A payment plan.
a payment plan with the IRS. So like if they still owe some sort of taxes, but they're on a payment plan and they're paying that off per the agreement with the IRS, USCIS is now deciding that that's not good enough, that it needs to be paid off in full.
Right.
But it's really misleading because it, again, sounds like, oh, well, these are people who don't pay taxes or haven't paid taxes, and now we're cracking down and asking them to pay taxes. Requirements for meeting tax obligations has always been a thing. It's literally one of the questions on the N-400 application is, have you paid taxes for every year that you've been a permanent resident, and do you owe any taxes? It's 2 questions on there. The N-400 form is available online to anybody that just wants to fucking Google it.
I was actually going to ask if you can clarify what the heck is the N-400 for people who are listening.
The N-400 is the form application for naturalization for citizenship. So it's the form that people would file when they apply for citizenship. And there's a whole list of yes/no questions on there. And 2 of those questions are, have you filed taxes for every year, and do you owe any taxes? And I think the phrasing might be a little bit different. I think there's one that says, have you ever called yourself a non-resident to avoid paying taxes or something like that? But tax-related questions, they are on there, have been on there for decades, and people do file taxes. When I meet with clients who are interested in applying for citizenship, that's one of the things that I've always screened for is, have you filed taxes? Are you up to date on your taxes? If you owe any taxes, do you have a payment plan? Like, are you on top of that? And I submit copies of taxes filed. And that's generally never been an issue. As long as somebody has filed taxes and is up to date on any payments owed, or if they have a payment plan and they're on top of that, then it's fine. The new issue now is that if you are on a payment plan, that is not enough. We want you to have it fully paid off. That is basically like the new requirement.
Yeah. So in speaking with other colleagues, even though this memorandum was sent out last August of 2025, it looks like they really are making those changes now. There have been people who go through the naturalization process and then are denied because of what Kimmy just said. They don't want a payment plan. They want those taxes to be paid up to date in full with no payment plan. Prior to this policy, a payment plan was acceptable so long as the person was making the payments, correct?
Yeah. And I actually have a client in that situation that we filed. So this policy was issued August 15th. And he applied like August 1st or something. It was literally like maybe a week or 2 before this announcement even came out. And he's paid taxes, but he owed some taxes for the most recent year. So he was on a payment plan and was paying that, and everything was fine because that's all that was required. And suddenly now there's this shift. 2 weeks later, the rules changed. And he still hasn't been scheduled for an interview because cases are just like taking forever to even be scheduled. And plus there's been like these government shutdowns that have kind of backlogged and pauses and all these things. So we're still waiting for his interview to be scheduled. But as soon as we found out about that, I reached out to him and was like, hey, I know you're on a payment plan, but you're going to need to have that paid off before the interview. And I don't remember if it was a lot. I don't think it was really that much. I think it might have been maybe like a couple thousand or something. So it's not something that he wasn't going to be able to pay off. But like everybody, we've all got a million other expenses. Mm-hmm. And so he was just opting to do it on a payment plan if possible, since that was acceptable. But now he's going to have to prioritize that over other things. And that is, that's just part of the requirements now. And also just this week, I had 2 interviews for citizenship for clients, and I haven't had these interviews scheduled for a minute now because of these delays and pauses and shutdowns and whatever, but I did notice the shift more recently in these interviews now that they are spending a lot more time asking about taxes and have you filed and are you on a payment plan and so on and so forth. So they seem to be applying more aggressively the new policy now.
So I guess for listeners out there, if they get denied, do they get to keep their green card?
Usually, yes, unless they're deportable for some reason. But in order to be deportable, usually it takes something like really serious. You know, you've been convicted of some particularly serious crime. But if you're working with an attorney, I think they would have kind of like screened you for that just to make sure that it's not going to be an issue going forward. But assuming you're not deportable, then you just keep your resident status. You know, you continue to be a permanent resident. It's just that you're not going to be able to advance to the next level of being a citizen.
And the reason why I'm asking this too is you said assuming you're not deportable. So if you are deportable, you could lose that lawful permanent resident status. You could lose your green card. But how can somebody become deportable at the point of naturalization? Like what would happen for somebody to become deportable at that point?
I mean, generally it's like criminal charges. Like if you've been convicted of a crime that makes you deportable, and usually is it a crime involving moral turpitude
yeah.
within 5 years of gaining your permanent residence, or an aggravated felony at any time. So if you are convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude within the first 5 years of permanent residence, then that can be an issue. And you apply for citizenship, obviously you'll be on the radar and probably issued an NTA.
The moment you start the naturalization process, everything's going to come out.
Correct. And even when you do apply for citizenship, the statutory period for good moral character is 5 years. However, they can look back beyond that as a discretionary matter, in particular if there's something more serious, like they can take that into account for discretionary purposes, depending on what it is.
Right. So if you go to your attorney, and this is for listeners to always be honest with your attorneys, because if you're in your mind, you're saying, well, this happened in the 80s, it happened in the 90s, the 70s, it's been way before the statutory 5 years. Like Kibby said, it could still be used.
Right. Like a common one is like, oh, but I paid it off, or I paid the fine, or I completed the sentence, or whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That means that there's a conviction. And whatever you were convicted of needs to be disclosed. And not just that, but even if it was expunged.
Right.
I was at an interview, I think it was at the Chicago office one time. I was there for, I think might have been a citizenship case. But anyway, as we're waiting in the waiting area for the officers to call us in, this other attorney walks out with his client, and they sit down, and the attorney just damn near loses his fucking mind onto this client. He's like, why didn't you tell me that you were arrested for this thing? And it turns out that this guy had been arrested for some sort of crime, but somehow managed to get it expunged. And then thought that because it was expunged, he didn't have to disclose it, and it wasn't going to come up. And it came up.
Yeah.
And the attorney didn't know about it.
Right.
And now he's obviously going to be denied for whatever benefit he had applied for. But it was just another reminder that, like, just because it's expunged doesn't mean that for immigration purposes it goes away. Like, it still needs to be disclosed.
Right.
And two, don't think that going through the process of getting something expunged is going to clear it off your record for immigration purposes.
That was my following point too.
So if you're only clearing it, or if you're only getting it expunged because you want it off the record for your citizenship application, you're wasting your time and money. I mean, you can do it for other reasons, but for any immigration benefit, it's still going to have to be disclosed.
Right. And the questionnaire does ask if you've ever been arrested or convicted, even if it's been expunged. Right. Yeah, you have to disclose that. So an omission, just because it's been expunged, doesn't mean you have the right to omit.
Correct. And all you've done is create more work for yourself, because now you got to go through the process of like unsealing those records.
Right. Right.
Which is even more stupid.
Yeah. So what we're getting at is, if and when that time comes that you decide to go through the naturalization process because you want to become a U.S. citizen, make sure you disclose the important information to your attorney, and make sure that you're aware that once you submit that, it's free game for USCIS to consider everything from your history.
Right. And just because it's imperfect doesn't mean that it's a disqualifier, but you're really going to want somebody to evaluate that properly and let you know from a legal perspective whether it's a problem or not.
Right.
And try to know that before you apply.
Exactly.
Because it also happens where people sometimes come in because they got denied for a benefit or denied for citizenship, and they're like, oh, help me appeal this. And it turns out like they didn't qualify. There's nothing to appeal.
Oh, okay.
You know, like I wish you would have come to me sooner so that I could have told you, like, don't waste your money and your time applying for this.
Did they do it themselves? And
They
then
had done it
realized-
themselves,
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And you just have to wait out the time that's required for this. I mean, again, if you want to waste, I'm sure they eventually might have found somebody that was willing to do the appeal for them, but it's not going to get anywhere if legally you just don't qualify.
Right. There are some requirements you have to meet, and I said those at the beginning of the episode. And if you don't meet those requirements, including good moral character, you will be denied. You cannot become a U.S. citizen.
Taxes was one thing we already talked about. The other one that I want to talk about on here as far as criteria or new things that they're looking at for good moral character that tends to come up is payments for child support or overdue payments for child support. This isn't necessarily new. This has been a criteria for a long time because I've definitely had a client years back who was backed up on child support payments. He had applied for citizenship before he became my client and then got backed up with child support payments while he was waiting for the citizenship interview. And by the time he got to his appointment, he was behind on like a couple of payments or whatever. And he got denied citizenship for that reason. And I want to say that was like probably 4 or 5 years ago. So I don't know, like 2020, 2021. So that's been a criteria, but I think they're just reiterating that they're continuing to look at that. So yeah, if you're behind on child support payments, definitely want to make sure that you're up to date on any of that before pursuing anything like citizenship.
It seems like they're really harping on child support payments or back payments of child support. Because I heard recently that...
The passports?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you could lose your passport if you're back on... Right?
That's for U.S. citizens.
No, I mean, yeah, of course. Yeah, U.S. citizens.
That's a switch to now being a U.S. citizen.
Right.
And you're backed up on
Child
support payments, or your payments are in arrears or whatever it's called. They're now saying that they're revoking passports. And that's not just people who naturalized, by the way. That's also like U.S. born citizens.
Right.
Anybody. So
that's
that
not exclusive. That's not exclusive. It's inclusive.
It's very inclusive.
Everyone falls under that umbrella.
Right. So yeah, I guess they're like trying to make an issue of that suddenly. Not that it's not a problem. Obviously, if you do have child support payments to pay, please be on top of it. And you should always comply with your minimal legal obligations in that regard, regardless of whether USCIS says that you should. But I feel like DHS and USCIS are now kind of like going out of their way to pretend that this is some big new thing that they're going after, when it's really been a part of the evaluation this whole time. So
Right. So that was pretty much it. Good moral character. Again, this is just with a focus on the naturalization process, what the standard is for good moral character, how it may or may not affect you, how USCIS will look at it holistically. And yeah, we hope you learned a lot from this. If you have any questions, you can email us at routesthepod@gmail.com, routesthepod@gmail.com, as well as comment, like, subscribe, and tell us what episodes you would like us to talk about in the future.
yeah, or if you have any questions about any of the stuff that we just talked about or want to know more about, also let us know. We'll be happy to get more into it if you want us to.
Yes. So until then, good luck and God bless.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.